Good evening, and welcome to Footnotes Folly. I am Professor Reginald St. John Pemberton, and tonight we open the fifth book of Herodotus of Halicarnassus, the book the ancients call Terpsichore. We carry on in plain modern English, from the first line, with nothing left out, still using Macaulay's public domain translation. The plain rendering, and the muttering, are my own. This is part 1 to 5. Darius has gone home from Scythia, but he has left a general, Megabazus, and a great army in Europe, and now the Persian tide laps at the edge of Greece itself. In this part Megabazus subdues the tribes of Thrace, deports a whole nation, the Paeonians, into Asia, and sends envoys to demand earth and water of Macedon, envoys who behave so badly at the feast that young Alexander has them quietly murdered. And the clever Histiaeus of Miletus, who once saved Darius, is flattered into a golden cage at Susa. Let us begin.
In the meantime, those Persians whom Darius had left behind in Europe, with Megabazus as their commander, first subdued the people of Perinthos among the Hellespontines, because they refused to be subject to Darius. These people had already, in former times, been harshly treated by the Paeonians. The Paeonians from the Strymon had been commanded by an oracle of their god to march against the Perinthians, and if the Perinthians, when encamped opposite them, shouted aloud and called to them by name, then they were to attack, but if the Perinthians did not shout to them, they were not to attack. So the Paeonians proceeded in this way. When the Perinthians were encamped opposite them in the suburb of their city, a challenge was made and single combat took place in 3 different forms. They matched man against man, horse against horse, and dog against dog. Since the Perinthians were winning in 2 of the 3 contests, they raised a shout of paean in their exultation. The Paeonians guessed that this was the very thing spoken of in the oracle, and no doubt said to one another that now the oracle was being fulfilled for them, and now it was time to act. So the Paeonians attacked the Perinthians after they had raised the shout of paean, and they had much the better in the fight, leaving only a few of them alive. So it had happened with the things formerly done to them by the Paeonians. At this time, although the Perinthians proved themselves brave men in defense of their freedom, the Persians and Megabazus overcame them by force of numbers. After Perinthos had been conquered, Megabazus marched his army through the length of Thracia, forcing every city and every race of the people who lived there to submit to the king. For Darius had commanded him to subdue Thracia. Now the Thracian race is the most numerous in all the world, except for the Indians, and if it were ruled by one man, or united in one purpose, it would, in my opinion, be irresistible in battle and by far the strongest of all nations. But since this is impossible for them and can never come to pass among them, they are weak for that reason. They have many names, belonging to their various tribes in different places, but nearly all of them follow almost the same customs, except the Gitai, the Trojans, and those who live above the Crestonians. I have already spoken of the practices of the Gitai, who believe themselves to be immortal. The Trojans do everything else in the same way as the other Thracians, but with those who are born and those who die among them they act as follows. When a child is born, the nearest can sit around it and lament all the evils that it must now endure, now that it has been born, listing the whole number of human ills. But when a man is dead, they cover him in the earth with sport and rejoicing, saying at the same time from what great evils he has escaped, and how he is now in perfect bliss. Those who live above the Crestonians do as follows. Each man has many wives, and when any one of them dies, a great contest takes place among his wives, with much effort by their friends, over the question of which wife was most loved by her husband. The woman preferred by the decision and honored in this way is first praised by both men and women. Then her throat is cut over the tomb by her nearest kin, and afterward she is buried together with her husband. The other wives are exceedingly grieved by this, for it is counted as the greatest reproach to them. Among the other Thracians, the custom is to sell their children to be carried away out of the country. They do not keep watch over their maidens, but allow them to have intercourse with whatever men they please, but over their wives they keep very strict watch, and they buy their wives from their parents for great sums of money. To be marked with tattooed figures is considered a sign of noble rank, while not to be so marked is a sign of low birth. Not to work is counted most honorable, and to be a worker of the soil is considered above all things dishonorable. To live by war and plunder is the most honorable way of life. These are their most remarkable customs. Of the gods, they worship only Ares, Dionysos, and Artemis. Their kings, however, unlike the rest of the people, worship Hermes more than all other gods, swear by him alone, and say that they are descended from Hermes. Their manner of burial for the rich is this. For 3 days they expose the corpse to view, and they slaughter all kinds of victims and feast, after first making lamentation. Then they perform the burial rites, either consuming the body with fire or covering it in the earth without burning it. After they have heaped up a mound, they celebrate games with every kind of contest, and naturally the greatest prizes are assigned for single combat. This is the manner of burial among the Thracians. As for the region farther toward the north of this country, no one can accurately declare who the men are who live there. But the parts immediately beyond the Ister are known to be uninhabited and vast in extent. The only men I can hear of who live beyond the Ister are those said to be called Sigeni, who use the Median style of dress. Their horses, it is said, have shaggy hair all over their bodies, as much as 5 fingers long. They are small, flat-nosed, and too weak to carry men, but when yoked to chariots they are very spirited. Therefore the natives of the country drive chariots. The boundaries of this people are said to extend to the parts near the Envoys, who live on the Adriatic, and people say that they are colonists from the Medes. How they could have come to be colonists from the Medes I cannot conceive, but everything is possible in the long course of ages. However that may be, the Ligurians who live in the inland region above Massalia call traders Sigeni, and the men of Cyprus give the same name to spears. The Thracians say that the other side of the Aster is occupied by bees, and that because of them it is impossible to pass through and go farther. But to me, when they say this, they seem to say what is not probable, for these creatures are known to be unable to bear cold, and it seems to me that the regions toward the pole are uninhabitable because of the cold climate. These, then, are the tales reported about this country. However that may be, Megabazus was then making its coast regions subject to the Persians. Meanwhile Darius, as soon as he had crossed the Hellespont and come to Sardes, remembered the service rendered to him by Histiaeus the Milesian and also the advice of Cos the Mite, Elenian. He sent for them to come to Sardes, and offered them a choice of rewards. Histiaeus, being already despot of Miletus, did not ask for any additional government. Instead he asked for the district of Meokinos, which belonged to the Edonians, because he wished to found a city there. Histiaeus chose this for himself. Cos, not being a despot but a man of the people, asked to be made despot of Mytilene. After the desires of both had been fulfilled, they went away to the things they had chosen. At this same time it happened that Darius saw something that made him wish to command Megabazus to conquer the Paeonians and remove them by force from Europe into Asia. The thing was this. There were certain Paeonians named Pigers and Mantias, who, after Darius had crossed into Asia, came to Sardes because they themselves desired to rule over the Paeonians. They brought with them their sister, who was tall and beautiful. They waited for a time when Darius was sitting publicly in the suburb of the Lydian city, then dressed their sister in the best way they could and sent her to fetch water. She carried a water jar on her head, led a horse after her with a bridle around her arm, and at the same time spun flax. When the woman passed out of the city by him, Darius paid attention to the matter, because what the woman was doing was not Persian fashion, nor Lydian, nor indeed the manner of any people of Asia. Therefore he sent some of his spearmen, ordering them to watch what the woman would do with the horse. They followed her. When she reached the river, she watered the horse, and after watering it and filling her jar with water, she passed back by the same way, carrying the water on her head, leading the horse after her with the bridle around her arm and turning the spindle at the same time. Darius marveled both at what he heard from those who went to observe and at what he saw himself, and ordered that she be brought into his presence. When she was brought, her brothers also came, for they had been watching these things from no great distance away. When Darius asked what country she came from, the young men said that they were Paeonians, and that she was their sister. He asked who the Paeonians were, where on earth they lived, and what they wanted that they had come to Sardes. They declared to him that they had come to give themselves up to him, that Paeonia was a country situated on the river Strymon, that the Strymon was not far from Hellespont, and finally that they were colonists from the Teucrians of Troy. They told him each of these things. He then asked whether all the women of that land were as industrious as their sister, and they very readily answered this too, saying that it was so, for they had been doing this with that very purpose in mind. Then Darius wrote a letter to Megabazus, whom he had left to command his army in Thrace, ordering him to remove the Paeonians from their homes and bring them to the king, both themselves and their children and their wives. Immediately a horseman set out in haste, carrying the message to the Hellespont, and after crossing to the other side, he gave the paper to Megabazus. Megabazus read it, obtained guides from Thrace, and set out to march against Paeonia. The Paeonians, when they learned that the Persians were coming against them, gathered all their forces together and marched out toward the sea, supposing that the Persians, when they invaded, would attack from that side. The Paeonians were prepared, as I have said, to drive off the army of Megabazus when it came against them. But the Persians, hearing that the Paeonians had gathered their forces, and regarding the entrance that lay toward the sea, took their course with guides along the upper road. Passing unnoticed by the Paeonians, they fell upon their cities, which had been left without men. Finding them undefended, they easily took possession of them. When the Paeonians heard that their cities were in enemy hands, they at once dispersed, each tribe to its own dwelling place, and proceeded to surrender themselves to the Persians. In this way these tribes of the Paeonians, namely the Syropaeonians, the Paeoplians, and all as far as Lake Prazus, were removed from their homes and brought to Asia. But the people who lived around Mount Pangaeon, and around the Dobryans, Agrianians, and Otomantians, and around Lake Prazus itself, were not conquered by Megabazus at all. He even tried to remove the people who lived in the lake, whose dwellings were arranged in this way. In the middle of the lake there stood a platform fastened together and resting on tall piles, with only one narrow approach from the mainland, by a single bridge. No doubt the piles that supported the platform were first set there by the whole community working together. Since then, however, they have kept adding them according to this rule. Whenever a man marries, he brings 3 piles from the mountain called Orbelos for each wife and sets them under the platform as supports, and each man takes many wives. This is how they live. Each man owns a hut on the platform where he stays, and a trapdoor through the floor leading down to the lake. They tie their little children by the foot with a rope, because they are afraid they may roll into the water. They feed fish to their horses and beasts of burden, and there are so many fish that if a man opens the trapdoor and lowers an empty basket into the lake on a cord, after waiting only a short time he pulls it up full of fish. There are two kinds of fish, which they call paprax and tilon. So the Paeonians who had been conquered were being taken away to Asia. Meanwhile Megabazus, after conquering the Paeonians, sent 7 Persians as envoys to Macedonia. After Megabazus himself, these were the most distinguished men in the army. They were sent to Amyntas to demand earth and water for King Darius. Now the road from Lake Prazus into Macedonia is very short. First, close beside the lake, there is the mine from which, at a later time, a talent of silver came regularly every day to Alexander. After the mine, once one has crossed the mountain called Diceron, one is in Macedonia. These Persians then, who had been sent to Amyntas, arrived and came into his presence, and they demanded earth and water for King Darius. Amyntas was willing to give it. He also invited them to be his guests, prepared a splendid dinner, and received the Persians with friendly hospitality. Macedonian guest, friend, it is our Persian custom, when we give a great dinner, to bring in our concubines and lawful wives as well, so that they may sit beside us. Since you have welcomed us readily, entertained us splendidly as your guests, and are willing to give King Darius earth and water, agree also to follow our custom. Persians, our custom is not this, but that men should be apart from women. Yet since you are our masters and ask this too shall be given to you. After saying this, Amyntas sent for the women. When they came in answer to the summons, they sat down in order opposite the Persians. The Persians saw that the women were beautiful, and told Amyntas that what had been done was not at all well arranged. It would have been better, they said, for the women not to come at all than for them to come and not sit beside them, but instead sit opposite and torment their eyes. So Amyntas, under pressure, ordered the women to sit beside the Persians. When the women obeyed, the Persians, who were by now very drunk, immediately began to touch their breasts, and some also tried to kiss them. Amyntas saw this and kept quiet, though he was angry, because he was greatly afraid of the Persians. But Alexander, the son of Amyntas, was present and saw it too. Since he was young, and had no experience of disaster, he could no longer endure it. In anger and impatience he spoke to Amyntas. "My father, grant what your age requires, and go away to rest. Do not continue the drinking any longer. I will stay here and give our guests everything that is proper. My son, I think I understand your words, and that anger is heating you. You want to send me away and then do some violent deed. So I ask you not to use violence against these men, lest it bring ruin on us. Endure the sight of what is being done. As for my departure, in that I will do as you say." When Amyntas had made this request and gone away, Alexander spoke to the Persians. He told them that they had complete freedom with the women, whether they wished to have intercourse with all of them or with as many as they chose, and that they themselves would decide about that. But since the hour for sleep was now approaching, and since he saw that they had drunk well, he asked them, if it pleased them, to let the women go away to bathe. After they had bathed, they could receive them back again. The Persians readily agreed. Alexander dismissed the women after they had gone out, sending them to the women's chambers. Then he himself equipped beardless men, equal in number to the women, dressed them in the women's clothing, gave them daggers, and led them into the banqueting room. As he brought them in, Alexander told the Persians that they seemed to him to have been entertained at a feast lacking nothing. Everything they had, and everything they had been able to discover and provide, had been supplied. Most of all, he said, they were freely giving them their mothers and sisters besides, so that the Persians might fully understand that they were being honored as they deserved, and might report to the king who had sent them that a man of Hellas, ruling the Macedonians under him, had entertained them well at board and in bed. After saying this, Alexander seated one Macedonian man disguised as a woman beside each Persian, and when the Persians tried to lay hands on them, the Macedonians killed them. So these men died in that way, both the Persians themselves and their company of servants. For they had come with carriages, attendants, and all the usual display of equipment, and all of this disappeared at the same time as they did. Not long afterward the Persians made a great search for these men, but Alexander stopped it by cunning. He gave large sums of money, and also his own sister, whose name was Gygia, to Bubares, a Persian who commanded those searching for the men who had been killed. By giving him these things, Alexander brought the search to an end. In this way the death of these Persians was kept hidden. As for the descendants of Perdiccas, they are Hellenes, as they themselves say. I myself know this to be true, and later in the history, I will prove that they are Hellenes. Moreover, the Hellenodici, who managed the games at Olympia, decided that they were so. When Alexander wished to compete in the games, and had gone down into the arena for that purpose, the Hellenes who were to run against him tried to shut him out, saying that the contest was not for barbarians, but for Hellenes. But Alexander proved that he was of Argos, and was judged to be a Hellene, and when he entered the foot race, his lot came out with that of the first runner. So this is how those events happened. At the same time, Megabazus had arrived at the Hellespont with the Paeonians. From there he crossed the straits and came to Sardes. Now Histiaeus the Milesian was already fortifying with a wall the place he had asked for and received from Darius as his reward for preserving the bridge of boats. This place was called Megabazus, and lay along the bank of the river Strymon. Megabazus saw what Histiaeus was doing, and as soon as he reached Sardes with the Paeonians, he spoke to Darius. He asked what kind of thing the king had done, granting permission to a clever and cunning Hellene to found a city in Thracia, in a place where there was abundant forest for shipbuilding, much wood for oars, silver mines, and large numbers of both Hellenes and barbarians living nearby. Once these people had obtained a leader, Megabazus warned, they would do whatever that leader commanded, by day and by night. Therefore, he urged the king to stop Histiaeus from doing this, so that he would not be drawn into a domestic war. He should stop him by sending for him in a courteous manner, but once Histiaeus was in his hands, he should make sure that he never returned again to the land of the Hellenes. By speaking in this way, Megabazus easily persuaded Darius, who thought he had truly foretold what was likely to happen. So Darius sent a messenger to Megabazus with this message. Darius had considered the matter and found no one more sincerely well disposed than Histiaeus toward himself and his power, and he knew this from deeds, not words. Since he now had great matters in mind to accomplish, Histiaeus must by all means come to him, so that the king might share them with him. Histiaeus trusted these words, and at the same time considered it a great thing to become a counselor of the king, and came to Sardes. When he arrived, Darius told him that he had sent for him because, after returning from the Scythians and after Histiaeus had gone out of his sight, he had never so quickly desired to see anything again as he had desired to see Histiaeus and speak with him. He had understood, he said, that the most valuable of all possessions is a friend who is intelligent and sincerely well disposed, and both of these qualities, he knew and could testify, existed in Histiaeus in relation to his affairs. Therefore, since Histiaeus had done well in coming, this was what the king proposed. He should leave Miletus alone, and also his newly founded city in Thracia, and come with Darius to Susa, have whatever Darius had, eat at his table, and be his counselor. So Darius spoke. Then, after appointing Artaphernes, his own brother and his father's son, to be governor of Sardes, he marched away to Susa, taking Histiaeus with him. First, however, he appointed Attanes to command those who lived along the sea coasts. The father of this Attanes was Sismones, who had been one of the royal judges. King Cambyses killed Sismones because he had judged a case unjustly for money, and flayed off all his skin. After stripping off the skin, Cambyses cut leather thongs from it and stretched them across the seat on which Sismones had been accustomed to sit when giving judgment. Having stretched them on the seat, Cambyses appointed the son of the same Sismones whom he had killed and flayed to be judge in his father's place, and ordered him to remember what seat he was sitting on when he gave judgment. This Attanes, then, who had been made to sit on that seat, had now become the successor of Megabazus in command. He conquered the Byzantines and Chalcedonians. He conquered Antandros in the land of Troas and Lamponian, and after receiving ships from the Lesbians, he conquered Lemnos and Imbros, both of which were still inhabited at that time by Pelasgians. Of these the Lemnians fought well and defended themselves for a long time, but at last they were brought to ruin. Over those who survived, the Persians set Herodotus as governor, the brother of that Meandrios who had been king of Samos. Herodotus ruled in Lemnos until his death. The reason for the Persian actions was this. Attanes kept reducing all to slavery and subduing them, accusing some of deserting to the Scythians and others of damaging the army of Darius as it came back from Scythia.
And there we will pause, with Histiaeus kicking his heels at the Persian court, sweet words in his ears and a kingdom's worth of suspicion behind them. Next time, in part 26, his deputy Aristagoras blunders into a war he cannot win, sets all Ionia ablaze in revolt against the great Cain, and goes begging from city to city in Greece, showing the Spartans a bronze map of the whole world to tempt them east. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly.